Breaking tonight, two forces of American power collided, and neither walked away unchanged. On one side, the United States Senate, moving with rare urgency. On the other, the Trump Organization, facing a stunning courtroom blow. Within hours, two developments reshaped the political landscape. First, lawmakers moved to block what critics called a quiet takeover of the Kennedy Center, one of the nation's most symbolic cultural institutions. Second, a court issued a massive $75 million financial penalty against the Trump Organization, citing systemic violations and repeated failures of compliance. Individually, these events are significant. Together, they tell a larger story, a story about boundaries, about institutions testing themselves, about how power behaves when it meets resistance. The Senate action wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was procedural, but it sent a message. Cultural institutions are not extensions of political identity. They belong to the public. Meanwhile, the courtroom ruling carried a different weight. It wasn't symbolic, it was tangible. $75 million, an amount large enough to alter strategy, reputation, and momentum. Legal analysts describe the moment as convergent accountability. Two arenas, two pressures, one question. What happens when influence meets limit? This is not a collapse. It is a test. And tests reveal structure. The Kennedy Center is not just a building. It is memory. It is tradition. It is a place where politics pauses and art speaks. For decades, it has remained a neutral ground, a cultural commons above ideology. That's why the Senate's intervention carried unusual gravity. Lawmakers from across ideological lines argued that cultural stewardship must remain separate from political branding. Their concern was not partisan. It was architectural. Institutions shape identity. And identity shapes future. One senator summarized it quietly. Power should not inherit culture. It should protect it. The proposed shift in control raised alarms not because of who might benefit, but because of what might change. Art thrives on openness. Politics thrives on alignment. Blending the two risks something subtle, but permanent. The Senate's halt was not defiance. It was preservation. A reminder that some spaces are meant to remain shared. Courtrooms speak in numbers. And this number was loud. A $75 million penalty is not corrective. It is structural. Legal observers say such fines are designed to do more than punish. They recalibrate behavior. They reshape internal systems. They force reflection. This ruling wasn't about a single mistake. It was about pattern. Pattern implies choice. Choice implies responsibility. The court's language was precise, repeated failure, systemic weakness, disregard for compliance. These are not emotional words. They are architectural. They describe how something is built. And when structure fails, consequence follows. For organizations defined by strength, this kind of ruling does more than cost money. It alters narrative. Politics reacts to energy. And this week, energy shifted. Supporters questioned timing. Critics questioned restraint. Neutral observers questioned scale. But what united them was recognition. This wasn't routine. The Senate action and the court ruling formed a pressure field, not because of ideology, but because of alignment. Institutions moved, law moved, and when systems move at once, attention follows. Power is not static, it is relational. It exists only in context. And context just changed. Every era teaches its leaders something, sometimes gently, sometimes abruptly. This moment carries a quiet lesson. Influence expands easily, but legitimacy must be renewed. Cultural institutions resist ownership. Legal systems resist exception. Not out of hostility, out of design. They exist to balance, to remind, to test. This is not about victory or defeat. It is about structure remembering its purpose, And in that remembering, something rare occurs. Power is asked not how far it can go, but whether it should. And that question changes everything. Institutions are slow. They don't trend. They don't react emotionally. They don't panic. They absorb pressure. And when they finally move, it feels deliberate, almost surgical. The Senate's halt did not come from outrage. It came from review, committee rooms, legal memos, quiet objections raised in corridors. This is how systems protect themselves. Not with drama, but with process. One senior staffer described it as a long breath before a boundary. That boundary wasn't aimed at a person. It was aimed at precedent. Because once a cultural institution becomes a political instrument, it doesn't return easily. The move wasn't loud. It was firm. And firmness is how institutions speak. The courtroom ruling landed like a recalibration. $75 million is not symbolic. It reshapes planning. It alters risk models. It forces internal review. Financial analysts note that penalties of this scale ripple outward. Banks reassess exposure. Partners reevaluate alignment. Boards revisit governance. This is not punishment theater. It is structural pressure, and structural pressure changes behavior. One legal expert explained, large fines don't just correct error. They force architecture to change. They make systems ask, what are we building? How is it protected? Who is responsible? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. The Kennedy Center debate revealed a deeper tension. Who owns culture? Is it the state, the people, the moment, or is it something more fragile? A shared inheritance? Public institutions exist in a narrow space. They must be funded, but not owned, supported, but not shaped, protected, but not branded. The Senate's move was framed not as opposition, but as guardianship, one lawmaker said. Culture is not a prize. It's a promise. That promise belongs to generations not yet present. And once broken, it cannot be reassembled. What made this moment powerful was not either event alone, it was timing. Two arenas, political and legal, moved in the same week, not coordinated, not collusive, aligned. This is how momentum feels, not like motion, like gravity. Each action reinforces the other. Each decision reshapes the field. Supporters, critics, and observers all felt it. Something is shifting, not in ideology, in structure. And structure is destiny's framework. This is not a climax, it is a turn. A moment when systems remind everyone of their shape, that they are not owned, that they are not bent easily, that they are built to endure individuals. The lesson is not punitive, it is architectural. Power can move fast. Institutions move forever. And when they move together, they do not shout. They remind. That influence is temporary. That culture is shared. That law has memory. And that memory, slow and steady, always returns. Long before verdicts are finalized or policies reversed, something else begins to move. Reputation. It shifts quietly, in boardrooms, in donor circles, in institutions that calculate risk rather than ideology. The events of this week did not produce headlines alone. They produced hesitation. Hesitation is powerful. It causes meetings to pause, agendas to change, associations to be reconsidered. Not because anyone is forced, but because uncertainty carries cost. Reputation is an invisible asset, and like all assets, it can depreciate. The $75 million fine wasn't just a financial number. It became a data point. The Senate halt wasn't just procedural. It became a signal. Together, they formed a narrative environment. And environments shape behavior. In politics, speeches move people. In institutions, process moves reality. A committee vote, a judicial order, a procedural block. These are not emotional acts. They are structural ones. And structure communicates stability. The Senate didn't condemn, it clarified. The court didn't dramatize, it defined. That is the difference between reaction and governance. Governance doesn't shout, it records, it preserves, it draws lines. And those lines outlast headlines. Every generation must decide, is culture a reflection of power or a refuge from it? The Kennedy Center represents that question in concrete form. It is a place where stories are told without permission, where voices appear without allegiance, where beauty exists without endorsement. That is why its independence matters, not because of who is in office, but because of who will be. Control is efficient, culture is not. And in that inefficiency lies freedom. The Senate's action was not political theater, it was philosophical. A statement that some spaces must remain unpredictable, because unpredictability is where art lives. Courts speak in restraint. They do not editorialize. They measure. They cite. They conclude. The ruling against the Trump Organization did not describe intent. It described outcome. Failure of oversight, failure of compliance, failure of structure. These words do not accuse character. They diagnose systems. And systems are fixable, but only when acknowledged. That is the court's quiet demand, not submission. Correction. There is a belief that power protects itself. Often it does. But there is another truth. Systems exist to test power, not to erase it, to measure it, to remind it that it is not infinite. This moment teaches something subtle. Influence may shape opportunity, but institutions shape consequence. Culture resists ownership. Law resists exception, not because of who stands before them, but because of what they are designed to be. And in that design, there is a promise that no era, no individual, no force is larger than the structure meant to hold them. After the cameras move on, a different world continues. In offices, in courtrooms, in institutions that never sleep. That is where impact settles. Decisions made in public are processed in private. Strategies adjust. Risk models update. Boundaries are reread. The Senate's halt becomes policy. The court's fine becomes precedent, not spectacle. Infrastructure. And infrastructure is where futures are built. This is the part most people never see. The slow work of systems absorbing change. It is not dramatic. It is decisive. History is not written by events. It is written by what survives them. Buildings, laws, institutions. They carry memory. Long after personalities fade, structures remain. The Kennedy Center will still host performances. Courts will still issue rulings. Committees will still debate. That is the design. Individuals pass through. Systems persist. Not because they are perfect, but because they are corrected. Behind every institution are people. Staffers who draft language, judges who weigh evidence, senators who balance pressure. They are not abstract. They carry doubt. They feel consequence. They make choices in quiet rooms. This is where democracy lives, not in speeches, in restraint, in review, in saying not yet or not this way. Power often appears loud, but preservation is quiet. We expect turning points to explode, but most arrive as paperwork, a vote recorded, a ruling filed, a process paused. And yet, everything changes, not immediately, gradually, because systems do not shock, they steer, they do not end stories, they redirect them, and redirection is more powerful than reversal. This is not a story about a fine, or a building, or a name. It is a reminder that power is temporary, that culture is shared, that law remembers, that institutions, when they work, do not crush, they clarify, they say, you may rise, you may influence, you may shape a moment. But you do not own the future. The future belongs to the structure that holds us all. And in that structure, there is something rare. A promise.